In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 aspects of Automobilista 2's handling that I don't think are very realistic, or at best are certainly very different from just about every other racing sim on the market. So hopefully going through these points will explain why maybe you don't get on with AMS2 if you're a fan of a different simulator, and also they might actually help you understand AMS2 and drive it better in its current state. The main thing is that the AMS2 fanboys and fanboys in general cry the saltiest of tears after watching this video and have a meltdown in the comment section. That is what I do YouTube for. Welcome back to the Gamer Muscle YouTube channel. Click that like button and subscribe if you enjoy follically challenged sim racing. Also, remember we have a Fanatec affiliate link and a Amazon affiliate link if you're buying sim racing equipment, and that allows me to do what I do here, which is produce videos that make you want to tear your hair out, which ironically makes you look more like me. So, right, the 3 aspects of AMS2 that I think are not really that realistic. Before I actually go into it, I do want to say I'm actually quite a fan of Automobilista 2. You've got amazing VR, amazing graphics, fantastic tracks and content that just aren't in any other simulator, and the developer, Reiza, are amazing. I'm a total Reiza fanboy, as I am of Kunos, Sector 3, and any developer for that matter that just keeps working on their game and obviously has a passion for the game they're making, as opposed to being a completely dead corporate entity. So with that out of the way, the first thing that I want to talk about, and the first handling characteristic that's very different from other sims, is of course the one I keep going on about, the rear differential in Automobilista 2. So any car that has rear differential options, this doesn't actually apply to cars that don't have rear differential options, don't seem to have this problem so much, but any car that has a limited slip differential options on the rear diff, regardless of the diff settings, you don't seem to be able to get subtle lift-off oversteer, or like coast lift-off oversteer. Now, as you can see here, what I've done with this is a Porsche GT3 car. I have effectively made the diff as open as possible. You can't turn it off completely, but this is effectively as open as you can make the rear diff on a Porsche GT3 car in Automobilista 2. So let's go back and drive. I'm going to move the brake bias farther back. Luke, I am your father. Further back. And we'll get on the track here. So what you find in Automobilista 2 relative to other simulators is that the rear of the car, even with the diff set as open as possible, only really turns in once the back has really started to slide, and once you've effectively, or what it comes across as, I could be wrong here, but what it comes across as is once you've effectively started to get onto the limit of the rear tyres. Rather than the turn-in being the rotation of the vehicle due to the freedom of the left and right tyre at the rear to rotate independently, it's almost as if you are getting the turn-in from going over the mechanical grip. And the result is, like, this diff is as open as it will go, and I'm effectively having to, I've moved the brake bias really far back, and I am having to really get on the brakes to turn the car in. I'm really having to get onto the limit to just get the car to turn in, and even then the car's not really rotating on its axis. It's kind of sliding around into the corner. It's hard to really see this in a video. I was trying different ways to demonstrate this in a video. There's no pedal inputs on the screen with Automobilista 2, unfortunately, which makes it even worse to demonstrate. The only thing I can really say is, and I'm pretty sure other people notice this if you play other simulators, the only thing I can really say is get into Race Room, Assetto Corsa Competizione, iRacing, get into those racing simulators, set the diff as open as possible, and just go into a sustained corner like this, turning right, and then come off the gas. And you'll notice straight away the car it will start turning straight away. And in many cases, the car will actually, you might even lose the rear from the lift-off oversteer. Now, that's not ideal. You don't want that to happen, and that might be over the top. I'm not saying that the other simulators are perfect, but it is definitely the rear is definitely way less willing to rotate when you've totally opened the diff, and you have to really turn the car in on the brake in Automobilista 2 relative to other simulators, and I think possibly relative to real life vehicles as well. Weirdly, if you actually go into the setup and you make the diff, the rear differential, what would be the opposite, so effectively a locked rear diff. We are absolutely mental here. Really good with Automobilista 2 how they put the descriptions at the bottom for what all the settings do. They've done a really good job on that, and there's a lot of settings in this simulator for you to fiddle around with if that's what you're into. So it's really nice, and they've good descriptions that are easy to follow, which makes a change. A lot of sims get that wrong. But if we do that, I'm going to put a bit of traction control on as well. Yeah, look at that. So that should be, unless I've got something wrong, that should be as locked as possible for the rear there. So we do that, back, drive, and what you find is you do notice a difference between it being locked versus open. Again, that's pure understeer. I need to put my brake bars further back again. But it is very much, again, as if you're like, the car is driving based off being on the limit of the tyres as opposed to the actual diff setting. Now, it's very, you can say as a player of the game, you can be like, well, I think it's the diff setting, or I think it's this setting that's not right in the game, and it could actually be something completely unrelated to the diff. Could be suspension, could be the tyre model. It's often very hard to pin down the specific aspect that causes the end resultant handling characteristic in the simulator. But I say with this, it's a diff setting based off the fact that when you change the diff in other simulators, it has the effect that I'm talking about, and it just doesn't have the same sort of effect in this. So again, everything is happening once you're on the brakes and once you've really chucking the car in, as opposed to that sort of coast situation of when you're getting off the throttle. Now obviously if you've got a completely locked diff, you would expect that you wouldn't get that rotational sort of coast turning because the diff is locked, but you don't get that with either it locked or open in Automobilista 2. So that is the first aspect of Automobilista 2 that I think is arguably unrealistic, but will certainly throw you off if you're used to other driving simulators. Let's go back to the menu and pick another car to talk about the second aspect of Automobilista 2, and that is the braking in Automobilista 2. So let's go for a the Ginetta Super Cup. Why not? Get back on the track here. So one of the really challenging aspects of Automobilista 2 is its braking, and I would say it's not as challenging or as awkward as the braking in iRacing. iRacing's braking is absolutely bonkers. It makes no sense at all. So let's keep this in context. No simulator is perfect. They all have their own little quirks and charms, and that's why we do sim racing. What you find with Automobilista 2's braking is, with what are more grippy cars in general, the brakes are very, very snaggy and abrupt in terms of the point where the car is actually at the limit. So you'll be braking and slowing down and it's all good, you're all fine. It's operating as it does in every other simulator. But when you're pushing it and you get to that lower speed and you're getting on the limit, let's move the brake bars back again. You get to that ideal limit point, and then all of a sudden you get into wish-washy rotational crazy land. Whereas in Race Room, Assetto Corsa Competizione, when you hit that sort of absolute on the limit braking point and the car's in a little bit of a slide, things are a lot more stable, and especially with the original Assetto Corsa, it's a lot easier to modulate that brake at the limit on slower speed corners and hold the car in a very nice little happy slide. Whereas things get very, very twitchy in AMS2, and it requires you to be really absurdly precise on your braking, specifically in low speed corners. Now, I know some people will go, some of the AMS2 fanboys will go, wow, Gamer Muscle, move the brake bias further forwards, which you can do, but then the back of the car doesn't rotate because of the diff thing previously. And also, you know, if you can control the car when you get on the brakes, it's slowing down enough, you shouldn't need to move the brake bias further forwards. Then they'll say, wow, Gamer Muscle, you need to, you can reduce the brake pressure, which indeed you can. But the problem with that is you're then just making it so that you're not actually, when you push on the brake, you're not actually necessarily getting to the limit. Like the actual limit point there is still going to have these same issues with the braking, even if you've made the brake pressure lighter. I mean, as long as with the brake pressure, as long as you're not locking up and snagging the wheels too much, the brake pressure shouldn't really be too much of a problem. And then they might say, wow, Gamer Muscle, set your sim racing equipment up correctly, or differently, less or more sensitive. And again, the objective is more not about the general sensitivity of your equipment, it's more once you get to the limit of the braking with a given car, the way the dynamics operate within that limit. So, and also, obviously, as I say, I don't have this. This is not something that stands out as particularly tricky. Well, it is tricky, but it's not as abrupt or as out of control in any other simulator, bar iRacing maybe. Well, iRacing is more that it just slops out and you can't do anything with it. But in AC, Race Room, things are just a lot more happier on that limit with the braking and the balance of the cars. The cars are just more happy on the brakes at the limit, and I think that is actually a lot more similar to what cars are like in reality. They tend to be somewhat forgiving and somewhat pliable and less like irritated to be broken at the limit. One thing I have found to mitigate this is if you run weirdly, if you make the brakes more sensitive, it seems easier to avoid it for me. That might just be my subjective thing. Also, if you have the steering a lot more sensitive in you run a lower steering lock in Automobilista 2, that actually allows you to quickly catch the car and correct it, or even allow the force feedback to correct it more without you having to go monster correcting, which again makes it easier. If you're very fast in your steering, you can probably correct it anyway. But again, this is all like relatively speaking within the overall context of racing simulators. It is certainly very different from the other simulators, and something I think a lot of people that aren't sort of AMS2 only masters will find very hard with AMS2. And that leads me to the third Automobilista 2 physics difference issue challenge, and that is the way the steering operates in Automobilista 2. Now, you might say that's a bit of a weird thing to call out, but if you were a big fan of Project Cars 2, and actually I do really, personally, I'm actually quite a fan of Project Cars 2. We played it loads. I'm actually quite a fan of Automobilista 2. I'm just critical of stuff that I enjoy. That's just how I'm critical of everything. I'm a miserable git. But if you played a lot of Project Cars 2, you'll be aware of this, and that is the amount that the steering authority affects the car handling. Way more than other simulators. So what you find is when you're going into a corner, say you go into it a little bit too hot, you can steer yourself through the corner. Like, by turning the wheel more, it's like you get magic additional grip, and it doesn't seem to do that because the car's slowing down because you've turned the wheel more, and that's causing more resistance on the front and you're wearing the tyres out. It just seems to be that the car responds to the steering more than it does the brake and the accelerator. Obviously, you know, with any simulator, you can change the spring rates, the ARB. You can make adjustments that make any car in any simulator more or less steering responsive to the steering. But regardless of within the context of the car setup, the steering sensitivity in Automobilista 2 and Project Cars 2, any Madness Engine game, to be honest, is just incomparable to other simulators. And if you're going from another sim way, and personally this is how I drive, I like to use the accelerator and brake. This is also why the diff coast and the rear diff thing kind of irritates me a little bit, because I like to have a very loose setup and drive with the pedals more than the steering wheel. If you're that type of a driver, you will probably find that trying to then actually change your way of driving to drive using the steering is very, very challenging and very, very different to what you'd be used to. Again, a general solution to that, in order to drive it as it is now and actually get the most out of it, I think making the steering more sensitive can help, because then when you're turning it in your sort of learnt amount of turning, or what you generally expect, you will be turning the wheel more, which will then allow you to turn it more. Or actually the opposite. It's contrasting, because you want the sensitivity there to deal with the twitchy rear, but if you have that sensitivity there, you're then turning the car too much, so you might be losing control of the car unexpectedly, but then you're not actually turning it enough where you could turn it more, so you'd want it more. It's very hard to actually think of a single thing to suggest that would actually be a solution for everyone in terms of getting around this. I mean, obviously, with every simulator, the ultimate solution is to remember that every driving simulator is its own game and has its own physics, and as a result has its own way to be played. So you just need to actually accept the individual handling and go, right, that is what that game is. This is how you have to approach it to be successful. But, you know, those, I think, for me, are the three main aspects of the handling to Automobilista 2 that I think people that are not AMS2 fanboys or super used to it will probably struggle with the most. And I think it is fair to say that I believe if Reiza can address those, make it more in line with what I think it would be more realistic as a lot of the other simulators do it. And I think real cars, for the reason I explained, you know, it's not realistic handling. I think the more they address that through whatever's required to address it, I think that will really help propel the success of Automobilista 2, because those are the things that are really holding it back. Because, as I say, the actual package of Automobilista 2 is really fantastic and really fun as a game, and especially if they bring this out on console. It'll be absolutely superb as a cross-platform racing simulator. You also, the fact of the matter is, with Automobilista 2, there is definitely a lot of depth to the physics and what's going on there. So, though the characteristics are quite unique in many ways to AMS2, there's a lot there to actually try and get around and master and still play with and be very interesting as a physics game. But, you know, guys, I think that is it for this one. I don't want it to go on too long. Obviously, as I said earlier, subscribe and like if you want to, if you want more follically challenged content. I'm looking forward to the comments on this. I'm sure they're going to be delightful. But yes, until the next video, thank you very much for watching. Happy tea drinking, guys, and goodbye, everybody.